Officer Marcus Thorne thought he had caught a high-level fraudster in a routine traffic stop that turned into an illegal audit of a black man's briefcase. What he didn't realize was that the man in the back seat wasn't just a driver, he was Julian Vane, a forensic accountant who had just finished a multi-million-dollar federal audit. One arrogant decision is about to cost the city millions and trigger a systemic collapse of the department. Sir, step out of the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them. I noticed several high-value checks on your passenger seat, and your story about where you're coming from isn't adding up. Julian Vane didn't move aggressively. He didn't raise his voice. At 45 years old, Julian was the definition of calculated. As a senior forensic accountant for one of the top firms in the country, his entire life was dedicated to spotting discrepancies that others missed. He spent his days in air-conditioned offices, untangling complex money laundering schemes, and testifying as an expert witness in federal court. He was a man of precision, and he knew exactly what was about to happen. Officer, those are client documents. They are sensitive, privileged, and currently under my legal protection, Julian stated firmly. Officer Marcus Thorne, a 7-year veteran with a reputation for aggressive, proactive policing, didn't want to hear about privilege. To him, a black man in a bespoke suit driving a $90,000 Audi through a neighborhood that Thorne considered transitional was a red flag. In Thorne's mind, success like this had to be fueled by something illicit. He had seen the briefcase, a high-end leather attaché, and he had seen the corners of official-looking documents. I'm conducting a suspicious activity investigation, Thorne snapped. I have reason to believe these documents are linked to a series of business frauds we've been tracking in the district. Now, are you going to cooperate, or am I going to have to bring you in for obstruction? Julian looked Thorne directly in the eye. He saw the badge, the hand resting on the belt, and the total lack of legal foundation in the officer's eyes. Julian knew the Fourth Amendment like the back of his hand. He knew that looking suspicious while being successful wasn't a crime. Officer Thorne, I see your name tag. I want to be very clear for your body camera. You have stopped me for a minor lane change violation. You have now escalated this into a fraud investigation without a shred of articulable suspicion. I am telling you now, if you open that briefcase, you are violating federal privacy laws and my constitutional rights. Thorne smirked. He loved it when they quoted the law. To him, it was a sign of desperation. I'll be the judge of what's a violation, counselor. Or whatever you are. Step back. As the dashcam rolled and a few bystanders began to pull out their phones, the atmosphere in the suburban street grew heavy. Julian Vane stepped back, his mind already beginning to format a spreadsheet of the damages he would eventually seek. He wasn't just a victim. He was an auditor. And he was about to audit Marcus Thorne's entire career. Before we see the moment the briefcase is forced open, I need you to do something. If you believe that no one is above the law, especially those sworn to protect it, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with the word accountability. It helps us tell these stories that the mainstream media often overlooks. Julian watched as Thorne reached into the car. The officer's movements were hurried, fueled by a hunch that was actually just bias wrapped in a uniform. Thorne grabbed the leather attaché. He didn't have a warrant. He didn't have consent. He had authority, or so he thought. Let's see what we really have here, Thorne muttered, clicking the latches open. Inside weren't stacks of street cash or drug ledgers. Inside were meticulously organized folders, a high-end encrypted laptop, and the working papers for a municipal audit Julian had just completed for a neighboring county. Thorne pulled out a thick packet of papers. What's this? Discrepancy report. Municipal budgeting? You're forging government documents now? Julian almost smiled, though his heart was pounding with indignation. Officer, you are holding the confidential audit of the City of Oak Ridge's pension fund. You are currently exposing the social security numbers and financial data of 3,000 public employees to the open air. Every second you hold those papers, the liability for your department doubles. Thorne scoffed, flipping through the pages. Looks like a fraud kit to me. You're under arrest for possession of forged instruments and suspicion of identity theft. The handcuffs clicked. The metal was cold against Julian's wrists, but his brain was fire. He wasn't thinking about the jail cell. He was thinking about the discovery phase of a federal lawsuit. The ride to the station was silent, save for the crackle of the police radio. Officer Thorne sat in the front, chest puffed out, convinced he had just made the bust of the year. In the back, Julian Vane sat with his hands cuffed behind him. Most people in this position would be panicking, crying, or begging for an explanation. Not Julian. He was mentally documenting every minute, calculating the billable hours of this injustice. When they arrived at the East District Precinct, Thorne didn't just walk Julian in, he paraded him. He wanted the other officers to see the man in the expensive suit he had taken down. Got a live one here, Sarge, Thorne announced to the desk sergeant, a weary man named Miller. Caught him with a car full of sensitive government documents, forged checks, and a briefcase full of municipal data. Looks like we found our audit fraud suspect. Sergeant Miller looked up from his paperwork, his eyes drifting from Thorne's excited face to Julian's calm, stoic expression. Miller had been on the force for 25 years. He knew the difference between a criminal caught red-handed and a man who was deeply, dangerously offended. Is that right? Miller asked, his voice neutral. And what was the probable cause for the search, Thorne? Suspicious behavior during a traffic stop. He was evasive about the documents. I did a visual sweep, saw what looked like forged instruments, and secured the evidence for public safety. Thorne lied, his voice confident. Julian spoke for the first time since entering the building. Sergeant Miller, I presume? My name is Julian Vane. I am a senior partner at Vane & Associates Forensic Accounting. The forged instruments Officer Thorne is referring to are certified bank drafts intended for the Oak Ridge Pension Fund escrow account. The suspicious documents are the results of a court-ordered forensic audit. You are currently presiding over a kidnapping and a massive breach of data privacy. Thorne laughed. See? They all have a story. He thinks because he knows a few big words, he can talk his way out of a felony. Search him, Thorne told the processing officer. As they emptied Julian's pockets, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. They pulled out a titanium credit card, a gold watch, and finally a heavy leather wallet. Inside was Julian's driver's license, but behind it was his True Shield, his Certified Fraud Examiner, CFE credentials, and his American Institute of CPAs, AICPA membership card. But the smoking gun was the final card, a special consultant badge from the Department of Justice. Sergeant Miller picked up the DOJ credential. He looked at the holographic seal. He looked at Julian's face. Then he looked at Thorne, who was busy cataloging the evidence from the briefcase on a nearby table. Thorne, Miller said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Come here, now. What is it, Sarge? Look at these ledgers. It's all here. Thousands of names, account numbers. Thorne, look at the ID, Miller interrupted, shoving the DOJ card into Thorne's hand. Thorne looked at it, his brow furrowed. So? He probably printed this at home. It's part of the fraud kit. Julian leaned forward slightly. Officer Thorne, if you believe that is fake, I encourage you to call the field office number on the back. Ask for Special Agent Sarah Jenkins. Tell her you have Julian Vane in custody and that you've broken the seal on the Oak Ridge files. I'd love to hear her reaction on speakerphone. Thorne's hand shook, just a fraction of an inch, but Julian noticed the arrogance was starting to leak out, replaced by a cold, creeping realization. I don't need to call anyone, Thorne blustered, though his voice had lost its edge. I have the evidence right here. This man was acting suspiciously near a high-value vehicle with sensitive data. He was driving the vehicle, Thorne. It's registered to him, Miller snapped. He turned to Julian. Mr. Vane, I need to verify these credentials. If you'll just wait in the intake room, not a cell, just the room, we'll get this cleared up. No, Julian said firmly. I'm already under arrest. You've read me my rights. You've handcuffed me. You've processed my property. We are well past clearing things up. I want my phone call, and I want it recorded on your precinct's official line. Miller sighed. He knew the department was in trouble. Who are you calling? Your lawyer. Julian looked at Thorne, a predatory glint in his eyes. No, I'm calling the city attorney of Oak Ridge. I need to inform them that their entire pension audit has been compromised by a San Diego police officer. And then I'm calling the press. Have you ever seen someone realize they've made a career-ending mistake in real time? Type oversight in the comments if you think every officer should be required to pass a constitutional law exam every year. Thorne tried to step toward the briefcase to close it, but Miller stopped him. Don't touch it, Marcus. Don't touch a single other thing. The precinct, which had been a buzz of activity minutes before, went deathly quiet. Every officer in the room was now looking at Thorne. They saw the outlier, the officer who had gone too far. The one who was about to bring a federal storm down on all of them. Julian Vane didn't call a criminal defense attorney. He didn't need one. Instead, he called a man named Elias Thorne, no relation to the officer, who was the most feared civil rights litigator in the state. Elias, Julian said, his voice echoing in the recorded intake room. I'm at the East District Precinct. I've been arrested for fraud by an officer who decided my skin color and my car didn't match. He has opened the Oak Ridge files. The seal is broken, Elias. The chain of custody for the entire municipal audit is gone. On the other end of the line, there was a long pause. Then, a low whistle. Julian, stay exactly where you are. Do not sign a single document. Do not accept an apology. I'm calling the city attorney and the local news desk. This isn't just a bad stop. This is a catastrophic liability event. While Julian waited, the precinct was in a state of controlled panic. Lieutenant Sarah Mendez, the watch commander, had been pulled out of a budget meeting. She was now standing in her office, staring at Officer Thorne through the glass. "Thorne, tell me exactly what your articulable suspicion was," Mendez demanded. "Ma'am, he looked nervous. He was shielding the briefcase from view," Thorne stammered. "He told you it was privileged information," Mendez shouted. "He gave you his name. You had his registration. You had his license. Why did you open the bag, Marcus? Why did you put hands on a DOJ consultant? I thought he was a sovereign citizen or something, using legal mumbo-jumbo to hide a scam. I was protecting the city from fraud." Mendez put her head in her hands. "Protecting the city? You just handed this man the keys to the city treasury. You didn't find fraud, Marcus. You created it. By breaking the seal on those audit working papers, you've potentially invalidated a 3-month investigation into the Oak Ridge Pension Fund. Do you know how much that audit cost? $500,000. And now, the city of Oak Ridge is going to sue us for compromising their data." Outside, the first news van arrived. The woman who had recorded the arrest in the parking lot had uploaded the video to X, formerly Twitter, and it was already at 50,000 views. The caption read, "Police arrest man for being too successful. Watch him school this officer on the Fourth Amendment." Julian was finally brought out of the intake room. He wasn't escorted by a patrolman, he was escorted by the lieutenant herself. "Mr. Vane, there has been a significant misunderstanding," Mendez said, her voice dripping with forced professional courtesy. "We are dropping all charges. Your property is being returned, and we have a car waiting to take you home or back to your office." Julian didn't reach for his keys. He looked at the table where his leather briefcase sat, now open, its contents shuffled and disorganized. "I'm not leaving yet, Lieutenant," Julian said calmly, "and I'm certainly not getting into a police vehicle. I've already called for a private transport. But before I go, I want a copy of the body camera footage and the dashcam footage from Officer Thorne's vehicle. I also want the names of every officer who handled my files while I was in that room." "Mr. Vane, we can handle this internally," Mendez tried. "There's no need to involve the courts. Officer Thorne will be disciplined." "Disciplined?" Julian let out a short, dry laugh. "Lieutenant, you're an officer of the law, but I'm an auditor. I don't look at intent. I look at impact. The impact of Officer Thorne's actions today is a breach of the Privacy Act of 1974, a violation of my civil rights under Section 1983, and the destruction of a privileged audit. You aren't just looking at a disciplinary hearing, you're looking at a federal consent decree." At that moment, the doors to the precinct swung open. Elias Thorne walked in, flanked by 2 junior associates and a camera crew from the local ABC affiliate. "My name is Elias Thorne, representing Mr. Julian Vane," he announced to the entire lobby. "We are here to serve a preservation of evidence notice. If one byte of that bodycam footage is deleted, if one page of those documents is lost, we will seek punitive damages that will bankrupt this municipality's insurance carrier." Officer Thorne, standing in the corner, looked smaller than he ever had in his life. The tough cop act had evaporated. He was now just a man who had realized that his bias had a price tag, and it was a price he couldn't afford. Do you think the lieutenant was genuinely sorry or just afraid of the lawsuit? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Type justice if you want to see the next part. The lawsuit wasn't just a threat. Within 48 hours, a 45-page complaint was filed in the United States District Court. But Julian Vane and his attorney, Elias, weren't just looking for a quick settlement. They were looking for a systemic audit. In the legal world, there is a phase called discovery. This is where the defendants, the city, and the police department must hand over their internal records. Julian knew that Officer Thorne's behavior that afternoon wasn't an isolated incident. Bias of that magnitude is rarely a one-time event. It's a pattern. "We don't just want Thorne's personnel file," Julian told his legal team as they sat in a glass-walled conference room. "I want his stop and frisk data for the last 5 years. I want the demographics of every person he cited for suspicious behavior or interference. We're going to run the numbers." As a forensic accountant, Julian was uniquely qualified to tear the department's data apart. When the files finally arrived, thousands of digital rows of police logs, Julian didn't hire a clerk to read them. He ran them through his own specialized software. The results were staggering. The data revealed that while the neighborhood Officer Thorne patrolled was 65% white, 82% of his discretionary stops involved people of color. Even more damning, Thorne had a consent-to-search rate that was nearly quadruple the department average. He was a hunter, and he had been targeting a specific demographic for years with zero oversight. "Look at this, Elias." Julian pointed to a glowing screen. "In 3 years, Thorne has discovered suspicious activity in parked cars 114 times. In 90% of those cases, the charges were later dropped for lack of evidence. But the city kept the seized cash under civil asset forfeiture. He wasn't just a cop, he was a revenue generator. Meanwhile, the city of Oak Ridge, the neighboring municipality whose pension audit Julian had been carrying, wasn't staying silent. They filed their own cross-claim against the San Diego Police Department. Their argument was simple. You compromised a sensitive government investigation. Now, you pay for the re-audit. The pressure on the mayor and the police chief reached a boiling point. The local news had dubbed the incident the accountant's audit, and the video of the arrest was now being used in law schools to demonstrate what not to do during a Terry stop. Officer Thorne was placed on administrative leave, but he still thought he could fight it. He gave a defiant interview to a small conservative blog, claiming he was being crucified by the woke mob for doing his job. I saw a man who didn't fit the profile of the car he was driving, holding documents that looked like forgeries, Thorne told the interviewer. I acted on my training. If the city doesn't back me up, no officer is safe. But Thorne's training was about to be put on trial. Julian's team found a training officer who was willing to testify that Thorne had been warned twice about his unorthodox stop methods and his tendency to escalate situations. The department had kept those warnings secret. Until now, they had the data, Julian said to a group of community leaders. They saw the numbers. They saw that one officer was responsible for a massive spike in civil rights complaints. But because he was bringing in forfeiture money, they looked the other way. Well, the audit is here and the bill is due. Do you think the department ignored Thorne's behavior because he was bringing in money? Type, follow the money in the comments. This story is about to get much more expensive for the city. The turning point of any major lawsuit is the deposition, a formal session where witnesses must testify under oath, and every word is recorded by a court reporter. For Officer Marcus Thorne, this was the day his warrior cop persona would meet the cold, hard reality of Julian Vane's forensic precision. The room was tense. Julian sat at the mahogany table, looking impeccably professional in a charcoal suit. Across from him sat Thorne, out of uniform for the first time, wearing a cheap tie and looking visibly uncomfortable. Elias, Julian's attorney, adjusted the camera lens and began. Officer Thorne, Elias started, his voice deceptively soft. On the day in question, you stated on your body camera that the documents in Mr. Vane's briefcase looked like forged instruments. Can you tell us, based on your training, what specifically about a GAAP-compliant municipal ledger looks like a forgery? Thorne cleared his throat. It was a lot of numbers. It didn't look like a standard receipt. In my experience, fraudsters carry binders of fake accounts. In your experience? Elias leaned in. Let's talk about that experience. We analyzed your stop history. You've cited suspicious documents as a reason for search 42 times in the last 24 months. Out of those 42 times, how many resulted in an actual fraud conviction? Thorne glanced at his lawyer. I don't have those numbers. I do. Julian interrupted quietly. 0. You have a 0% success rate in identifying fraud, Officer Thorne. Yet, you felt qualified to override the Fourth Amendment rights of a DOJ-certified consultant. Thorne's face began to redden. I was following a hunch. The neighborhood has been hit by a string of white-collar crimes. I saw a suspicious person. Define suspicious person without using the word black or expensive car, Elias snapped. The room went silent. Thorne's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Thorne couldn't answer. He sat there, fuming, as Elias displayed a series of screenshots from the officer's own private social media accounts, posts mocking rich elites and sharing memes that bordered on explicitly racial. You weren't investigating a crime, were you, Marcus? Elias asked. You were hunting. You saw a man who had achieved a level of success that offended your worldview, and you decided to use your badge to bring him down a notch. That's not true, Thorne shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He was being belligerent. He was questioning my authority. If he had just let me search the bag and go, none of this would have happened. And there it is, Julian said, his voice like ice. You believe that a citizen's refusal to surrender their constitutional rights is in itself a reason for arrest. That is the definition of tyranny, Officer Thorne. As the deposition continued, it became clear that Thorne hadn't acted alone. He admitted that his supervisors often encouraged stops that resulted in cash seizures because the department used that money to buy new equipment, drones, tactical gear, and undercover vehicles. This admission was the nuclear option. It wasn't just about one bad apple anymore. It was about a poison tree. By admitting that the department had a financial incentive to make these stops, Thorne had just opened the city up to a class action lawsuit from every person he had ever searched. By the end of the 6-hour session, Thorne looked broken. His lawyer was frantically whispering to the city's representatives in the hallway. They knew they couldn't let this go to a jury. A jury would see Julian, a man of high character and immense skill, and they would see Thorne, a man of bias and aggression. The verdict would be astronomical. We're going to offer a settlement, the city attorney whispered to the police chief. And it's going to have to be a big one. Because if Julian Vane takes the stand in open court, he won't just win a judgment, he'll burn the whole department down. How much do you think a person's dignity and rights are worth? Is there a dollar amount that makes this okay? Type no price tag in the comments if you think the city needs to do more than just pay money. As the transcripts from the deposition leaked to the local press, the city's political structure began to fracture. It wasn't just a police problem anymore, it was a taxpayer problem. The revelation that the police department was using civil asset forfeiture as a de facto slush fund sent shockwaves through the city council. Mayor Evelyn Reed, who had campaigned on a platform of transparency, found herself in the crosshairs. She called an emergency midnight session with the chief of police, Arthur Sterling. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Arthur, explain to me how one patrol officer is about to bankrupt our insurance pool," the mayor demanded, throwing a stack of news clippings onto the desk. "Julian Vane isn't just some guy we can settle with for 50 grand and a non-disclosure agreement. He's a forensic accountant. He's already found the paper trail for the forfeiture money." Chief Sterling looked exhausted. "Thorne was a producer, Evelyn. He brought in more suspicious cash than any 3 officers combined. We used that money for the new precinct gym, the tactical drone fleet, and the undercover surveillance van. Everyone was happy, until he stopped the wrong man." "The wrong man?" The mayor's voice rose. "There is no right man to profile Arthur, but because he stopped a man who literally investigates financial fraud for a living, he's exposed the fact that our department has been incentivized to violate the Fourth Amendment for profit." The city attorney says Vane's legal team is preparing a Monell claim. A Monell claim is the holy grail of civil rights lawsuits. It argues that the violation wasn't just an accident by one officer, but the result of an official policy or custom of the government itself. If Julian succeeded, the city wouldn't just be liable for the arrest. They would be liable for every stop Thorne had made in the last 5 years. Meanwhile, Julian Vane was receiving calls from people he didn't even know. Other residents, mostly from the same neighborhood where he was stopped, started coming forward with their own stories of Officer Thorne. "He took $400 from my glove box during a safety check and told me if I complained, he'd charge me with resisting," one college student told Julian's legal team. "He towed my car because I couldn't prove where I got the money for my rims," an elderly shop owner claimed. Julian realized that his case was the tip of the spear. He wasn't just fighting for his own dignity. He was the only person with the resources and the expert witness status to actually prove the corruption. "They thought they could buy my silence," Julian told Elias as they reviewed the city's first settlement offer, $500,000, and a private apology. "They don't realize I've already done the math. The damages to the Oak Ridge audit alone exceed that. The damage to my reputation and the systemic breach of privacy. That's where the real bill starts." Julian rejected the offer within an hour. His counter-demand was unheard of. He wanted a complete overhaul of the department's forfeiture policy, a federal monitor to oversee all stops, and the immediate termination of Officer Thorne. Not for misconduct, but for cause, ensuring he could never work in law enforcement again. "If they want me to go away," Julian said, "they have to change. If they don't change, I'll take them to the Supreme Court." The mayor was trapped. If she fought Julian in court, the city would likely lose millions and face a federal takeover of the police department. If she settled on Julian's terms, she would alienate the police union, which was already threatening a blue flu strike if Thorne was fired. It was a game of high-stakes political poker, and Julian Vane held all the aces. Do you think the mayor should fire the police chief along with Thorne? Type "clean house" in the comments. The next phase of the battle is about to move from the precinct to the courtroom steps. The city's legal team thought they had a plan B. If they couldn't discredit Julian Vane's character, they would try to discredit his professional work. They hired their own expert accountant to review the Oak Ridge files that Officer Thorne had seized. They hoped to find a single error, one tiny mistake in Julian's audit, to prove that he was incompetent and that Thorne's suspicion was actually justified by the results. But in the world of forensic accounting, looking for an error in Julian Vane's work was like looking for a crack in a diamond. During a pretrial hearing, the city's defense attorney, a sharp-tongued man named Gerald Vance, stood up with a smirk. "Your Honor, while the stop may have been procedurally irregular, we have evidence that the defendant, Mr. Vane, was actually mishandling the Oak Ridge pension data himself. We found discrepancies in the ledger he was carrying that afternoon." Julian didn't flinch. He leaned over to Elias and whispered, "They fell for it." "Actually, Your Honor," Elias interrupted, "we were hoping the defense would bring that up. You see, the discrepancy they found wasn't an error by Mr. Vane. It was the very crime he was investigating. By opening those files and letting their own expert poke around, the police department has just accidentally alerted the real criminals that we found their trail." The courtroom went dead silent. Julian stood up, Permitted by the judge to give a brief technical explanation as an officer of the court. The documents Officer Thorne seized contained a shadow ledger I discovered within the Oak Ridge municipal budget. I was on my way to the DOJ to report that a high-ranking city official in Oak Ridge, not San Diego, was embezzling millions. By Thorne breaking the seal and the San Diego City Attorney's Office sharing that data with outside experts, you have now leaked a confidential federal investigation. The evidence the city tried to use to smear Julian had just backfired in the most spectacular way possible. They hadn't just harassed a citizen. They had inadvertently obstructed a federal embezzlement probe. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Sterling, looked over her glasses at the city attorney. Let me get this straight. You seized confidential federal audit papers, broke the chain of custody, and then shared them with third parties to try and save yourself from a civil rights suit? And in doing so, you compromised a multi-million-dollar fraud case? We were trying to verify the suspicious nature of the documents, Your Honor, Vance stammered, the smirk completely gone from his face. What you did, the judge said, her voice dropping an octave, is create a liability so large I'm not sure the city's insurance can even cover it. Mr. Vane's suspicious behavior was him doing his job at the highest level of government service. Officer Thorne's hunch has now turned into a federal disaster. By that afternoon, the FBI was at the San Diego precinct. They weren't there to talk about the traffic stop. They were there to seize the servers and find out exactly who had seen the Oak Ridge files. Officer Thorne, who was sitting in the break room still hoping to be reinstated, was instead met by two federal agents. They didn't hand him a medal, they handed him a subpoena. His bust of the year was now officially a matter of national interest, but not in the way he had hoped. The city's evidence hadn't just failed. It had become the final nail in the coffin of Thorne's career and the department's autonomy. Do you think the city officials should be charged with obstruction of justice? Type, lock them up in the comments. We are approaching the final settlement and the shocking total of the bill the city has to pay. With the federal government now breathing down their necks and the obstruction evidence threatening to turn a civil case into a criminal one, the city of San Diego finally folded. They realized that if Julian Vane went to trial, the jury wouldn't just award him damages, they would send a message that would resonate across the entire country. The final settlement meeting didn't take place in a cramped precinct office. It happened in a neutral, high-security boardroom. On one side sat Julian Vane and Elias Thorne. On the other, the mayor, the city attorney, and the lead counsel for the city's insurance carrier. We are prepared to offer a total package of $4.2 million, the city attorney announced, pushing a document across the table. Julian didn't even look at the number. He looked at the mayor. Money is just a line item, Mayor Reed. Let's talk about the audit of justice. Where are the policy changes? The city had no choice but to agree to a consent decree. This meant the department would be under federal supervision for the next 5 years. Every stop made by an officer would be analyzed by an independent data firm to check for racial disparities. But the most shocking part of the settlement involved Officer Marcus Thorne. Officer Thorne is to be terminated for cause immediately, Elias stated. Furthermore, the city will not contest his decertification. We want it on his permanent record that he is unfit for law enforcement in any jurisdiction in the United States. He doesn't just lose this job, he loses the badge forever. The mayor nodded solemnly. It's already in motion. Chief Sterling has also submitted his early retirement. The department needs a fresh start. The $4.2 million settlement was broken down into several categories. $1.5 million for civil rights violations and unlawful arrest. $1.2 million in punitive damages for the intentional breach of privileged government data. $1 million to the city of Oak Ridge to cover the costs of the compromised pension audit and the resulting federal delays. $500,000 for legal fees and professional reputation restoration. As Julian signed the final page, he felt a sense of relief, but not because of the money. He felt relief because he knew that the revenue generator model of policing in that district was dead. The slush fund from civil asset forfeiture was being dissolved, and the money was being redirected into a community oversight board. But the story didn't end with the signature. As Julian walked out of the building, a sea of microphones greeted him. Mr. Vane, what are you going to do with over $4 million? A reporter shouted. Julian stopped and looked into the camera. I'm a forensic accountant. I know exactly where every cent is going. Half is going into a trust to provide legal defense for citizens who have been victims of illegal searches but can't afford a lawyer like Elias. The other half is going toward a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in finance and law. I want more people in the room who know their rights and how to count the cost when those rights are violated. While Julian was being hailed as a hero, Marcus Thorne was cleaning out his locker. No one came to shake his hand. No one offered him a good luck on his next chapter. He had become the ultimate liability. He had cost the city millions, cost his chief his job, and cost himself his future, all because he couldn't see past his own bias. Do you think 4.2 million was enough to compensate for the systematic corruption Julian uncovered? Let me know in the comments. Type accounting for change for the final part of this incredible story. The aftermath of the Vane versus the City case didn't just fade into the archives. It became a landmark case study in both law enforcement academies and business schools. The $4.2 million payout was the largest of its kind in the region's history. But the true cost was measured in the total restructuring of the city's power dynamics. Marcus Thorne attempted to move to a neighboring state to join a rural sheriff's office, but the Vane audit followed him. His name was now flagged in the National Decertification Index. When the rural sheriff saw the video of Thorne accusing a DOJ-certified accountant of fraud while holding the evidence of his own bias in his hands, the application was rejected within minutes. Thorne's career was not just over, it was a cautionary tale. Back in San Diego, the Julian Vane Scholarship for Legal and Financial Equity launched its first year with 10 students. Julian didn't just fund it. He mentored the students. He taught them that the most powerful weapon against systemic injustice isn't just a loud voice. It's the ability to read a balance sheet, understand the law, and audit the people in power. The Oak Ridge embezzlement case, which Thorne had nearly derailed, was eventually successfully prosecuted. Because Julian had meticulously documented the broken seal caused by the police, the federal prosecutors were able to reconstruct the evidence. 3 high-ranking officials were sentenced to federal prison. If Julian hadn't stood his ground that afternoon, they might have continued stealing millions from the public pension for another decade. In a final, rare interview with a national news outlet, Julian was asked if he hated the police after everything he went through. "I don't hate the police," Julian said, his voice calm and resonant. "I respect the law too much for that. But law without accountability is just organized bullying. I'm an auditor. My job is to find the truth behind the numbers. On the day I was arrested, the numbers in that department didn't add up. Now they do. Today, the bodycam footage of Julian Vane is mandatory viewing for every new recruit in the state. They are taught to look at the moment Thorne clicks the handcuffs and hear the ghost of the $4.2 million settlement ringing in the background. It serves as a permanent reminder. Bias is a liability. Arrogance is an expense, and the Fourth Amendment is not a suggestion. What is your biggest takeaway from Julian Vane's victory? Was it the power of knowing your rights, or the satisfaction of seeing a bully with a badge face the ultimate audit? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This story matters because Julian Vane had the tools to fight back. He had the knowledge, the credentials, and the courage to turn a moment of humiliation into a movement for reform. But remember, there are thousands of people stopped every day who don't have a DOJ badge in their wallet. They don't have a multi-million-dollar firm behind them. They only have the law. If this story opened your eyes to why accountability is the only way forward, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. We don't just tell stories, we audit the truth. Share this video with someone who needs to know that one person, armed with the truth and a clear ledger, can change the system. Thanks for watching until the very end. The numbers never lie, and today, justice finally balanced the books. We'll see you in the next one.